United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One's present and accounted for this evening. And we have quite a full agenda. I'm not sure I remember when the last time the agenda ran into the second page, but it does tonight. And so we shall begin post haste. The first order of business is the review of minutes September 5th and September 10th for the regular meeting and the September 10th closed session. I've been advised by council that I need to read the minutes for the closed session, so I will do that, and then I'll ask if there's any additions or corrections. All right. Following the regular meeting held on September 11th of the Marion City Council, we motioned to go into closed session at 8:40 p.m. in the City Hall, and the motion was made to close the meeting by Councilman Wyants and seconded by Councilman Vigliotti. Councilman Foster was not present. All voted to go into closed session with the exception of Councilman Frazier, who voted against going into closed session. A further note that Robin Frazier objected to closing the meeting from the audience, and a copy of the closing statement was given to her at the time, and the copy to be sent on 9/11/18 to OMBC.
Which is the Open Meetings Compliance Board.
Right. Citation of authority and purpose. Accordance to the Maryland Open Meetings Act, Title 10, Government Procedures, Subtitle 5, Meetings, Section 10-508A, this meeting was closed to discuss, in order to discuss with counsel, to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice, and to consult with staff and consultants or other individuals about pending or potential litigation. The topics discussed were, number one, an anonymous letter we received was sent to the Mayor and City Council regarding the City of Tawnytown Police Department and the legal steps that may be taken to investigate the items therein. And number two, an email correspondence received at 3:58 p.m., 9/10, from Dan Cox, attorney for Donald Frazier, threatening litigation against the city. Persons present at the closed session were Mayor McCarron, Councilwoman Fuller, Councilman Vigliotti and Wance, Acting City Manager Wypreck, City Clerk Kalman, City Attorney Gullo, Police Chief William Tyler, and Sergeant Brian Justice. Police Chief William Tyler and Sergeant Brian Justice left the meeting at 9:20 upon completion of the discussion of item 1. Action taken at the closed sessions. In item 1, no action was taken. Item 2, Councilman Wance made a motion, which was seconded by Councilman Vigliotti, to empower the mayor to take steps necessary to handle the potential litigation threatened by Donald Frazier. Motion carried 3-0. Councilman Vance made a motion to adjourn, which was seconded by Councilman Vigliotti. Passed 3-0 at 9:31 p.m. So do we have any additions or corrections on any of these minutes?
Mr. Mayor, I do have one. On the September 5th minutes for the workshop, under reception of delegation, if we could just correct the spelling of creamery.
Yep.
Oh,
I had that myself.
That's all I have, sir.
Anyone else?
On the
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, after you.
You go ahead, you were first.
On the second, thank you. On the second page of the workshop minutes, the motion to adjourn was carried 5-0, should be 4-0 because Mayor Pro Tem Foster was not present.
That's correct.
That's correct, too.
And then I have maybe the final correction. On the September 5th draft, it says Resolution 2018-10. I think that the minutes should reflect that the censure came out of an executive session in August. This is the third meeting in a row that the city council and mayor have gone into executive session, and that I received a copy on September 3rd of the censure, and the meeting was on September 5th. I think there was some misinformation said in the last meeting, so on Monday I'll propose that we add those words. I received a copy of this censure that came out of the executive session on September 3rd, 2 days before our meeting.
No action was taken on the censure until the...
Well, I wasn't told
public
about it, like I
meeting.
wasn't told you made a reservation for me in Ocean City. I wasn't told that you'd censured me until,
Well, you
and I found out
weren't
about it on
censured until
September
the council
3rd.
voted on it.
Well,
we gave you a
I'll
chance
make
to
a motion
explain
for
yourself.
that. Then on
The
the
censure took place September 10th.
On the September 10th meeting, I think the minutes should reflect that I opposed the minutes because they wrote in the minutes that I was the only one voting correctly that Lieutenant Etzler was indeed in the meeting. If you read this, it says, the motion was made by Frazier to amend the closed session minutes that Lieutenant Etzler was present and seconded by Vigliotti. The vote to accept the amendment was 3 opposed and Frazier in favor. The motion to approve all the minutes, and it goes on. I ended up voting against the minutes because you all overrode me on a simple majority vote.
That's accurate, right?
That whether or not he was present or not. That's really important to know.
Well,
I was curious why
The
Joe
majority of
seconded
the
my
council
motion.
feels like you were wrong.
Well, the people who were present for the closed meeting are the ones who voted that he wasn't there because he was not in the meeting.
He was in the meeting.
You were not even at the meeting to make that.
We don't need to discuss this. This
was in the
is
meeting throughout the
all
meeting.
been laid out, so that question is mute. So, all right, I have one addition, or correction to September the 10th meeting. In the a paragraph that says Mayor McCarron read the letter which the mayor and council members condemned the recent distribution of hateful and racist paraphernalia. I'm not sure paraphernalia is the right word there. It probably should say letters. because
Propaganda.
I don't think there was any kind of paraphernalia there.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I had a second correction on the second page of the 10th minutes. It said Mayor McCarron recommended a monthly retroactive stipend in the amount of $1,200 for acting city manager Whitebrick, and I voted for that, but we were never told how much. If you look at the video, it was called 20%. It was never, the dollar amount was something I was going to ask about at tonight's meeting because we were never told during that meeting that it was $1,200.
There you go.
So it should
Now you
reflect
know.
20%.
About 23%, I
23%, but because we were not told the dollar amount until we got our packets. So that's a correction to be made Monday.
Okay, I didn't recall anybody asking for the dollar amount. But anyway, that's what it is. Any other additions or corrections? All right, these will be up for approval on Monday night. Next, we have the reception of our auditors, DeLyon and Stang, to discuss our 2018 audit. It seems like you were just here, but time flies when you're having fun. So would you like to begin?
Each of you should have received a handout of the slides, and Jim is walking in as we speak with your complete draft audit report. Obviously, since you're just getting it tonight, the purpose of me coming was to give you the financial highlights And again, this is in draft form until you approve it.
Thank you.
Effective at next week's
Do
meeting.
you think we could get a mic to her?
Thank you, Jim.
Great, thank you so much.
Help me a little bit.
Still warm, too.
So what we found in the past is the audit report is rather lengthy, and to go through each page is very difficult. So what we have done now is shorten it into what we think is important and relevant highlights from the audit. And then, of course, if you have any further questions or discussion after you've had a chance to read the entire report, reach out to Barry and Jim, and they will make certain that your questions are answered before the meeting, the night you vote.
Okay.
So a quick reminder, our firm, De Leon and Stang, was engaged to perform a financial statement audit. There was no single audit requirement for this fiscal year because your federal grant expenditures were less than the threshold. We usually like to start our presentation by reminding everyone of their individual responsibilities. The financial statements are the responsibility of management. I met with Jim and Barry earlier this week to review the draft report in detail. We got through that pretty easily. They provided some feedback. They assisted with some open questions that we had, and so with that, you've received your draft tonight. Our responsibility as auditors is to plan and perform the audit to obtain reasonable assurance that there's no material misstatements to the financial statements and to express an opinion on those financial statements based on our audit procedures. The audit was performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. The city will receive an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, unmodified meaning clean audit report. Many of you who've been on council hear this every year. GASB requires 2 sets of financial statements. Your accounting system is able to produce 1 set of financial statements, so it is always very difficult at year end to hear the auditor talk about 2 sets of financial statements when you only see them in 1 format through the course of the year. So I remind you that we are required to give you a government-wide financial statements as well as fund level. And throughout these slides, it will reference you to the audit report. So at a later date, if you want to go back and say, let me look specifically at what is government-wide, you can have a quick, easy reference back. So we're going to hit a few of the financial highlights. The first slide talks about our government-wide total assets, and we are at $39.2 million, and that was a 1.8% decrease from fiscal year 2017. When we're talking about government-wide financial statements, again, that's looking at the entire organization, and we break it down into governmental activities and business-type activities. So the first few slides are going to separate and report on those 2 categories. You'll see that the significant portion of your assets are what we call business-type activities. It was $27.9 million, and that's your utility activities, water and sewer, and that's 71% of your total assets. The remaining assets are what we call governmental activities, public works, public safety, general government. This next slide kind of helps you put in perspective when we talk about total assets, what are the significant asset categories for each of the activities. So on the left-hand side, you'll see governmental activities. The total assets are about $11.2 million. Cash and cash equivalents are $5.5, and that's 49.3% of the total assets for the governmental activities. Capital assets is right up there at $5.6 million, and that's about 49.9% of the total assets. So when we're looking at our governmental activities between cash and cash equivalents and capital assets, that's pretty much the significant ones. You can add the 2 together and see we're covering the majority of them. On the business side, on the business type activities, you see some similarities. Capital assets are $21.6 million, and that's 77.1% of the total assets of the business type activities. Cash and cash equivalents are about $5.7 million, and that's 20.4% of the total assets for the business type activities. Again, at the bottom of the slide, it refers you to page 9 of the draft audit report, so you can look at where this data is coming from. From a government-wide perspective, the total liabilities are about $17.5 million, and that's 6.8% down from last year. 77% of those liabilities are in business-type activities at $13.4 million. The remaining balance of $4 million is what is in the governmental activities category. The significant liabilities are outlined here. For governmental activities, the largest liability is the net pension liability at $2.3 million, and that's 57% of the total liabilities. Our debt is $1.3 million, and that's about 34% of the total liabilities. On the business type activity side, you see that our debt is $13 million of the total 13.4, and the net pension liability is significantly smaller at about $166,000 for our business type activities. This next slide gives you a definition, because when you look at page 9 of the audit report, you see some terminology that you don't typically see when looking at a financial statement: deferred inflows and deferred outflows of resources. And this terminology is specific to municipalities. So we've provided a definition for you just for your reference, because again, I don't expect anyone to know what it is. It's very difficult to understand. So a deferred outflow is a consumption of net assets by the government that is applicable to a future period, and that's the key there, applicable to a future period. Where a deferred inflow is an acquisition of net assets by the government that is applicable. Oh, that says the same darn thing. Okay. I'll have to check that and get back on that one. So when you look at it, you can see that most of it's attributable to pension accounting. You remember a few years ago when the state of Maryland, when GASB came out and said that governments are now required to show their net pension liability on their basic financial statements. There was a lot of transition, and the state of Maryland started providing more detailed reports to the municipalities so that you would have an idea of your net proportionate share of the liabilities. And so along with that implementation came these words: deferred inflows and outflows, timing differences, actuarial assumptions, and all these things that make accounting a little bit tougher to understand. So most of ours here at the city are related to the pension accounting. When there are changes in actuarial assumptions or changes in net pension liability, all of these things typically are amortized. You don't get a direct hit in the year that the change occurs. So it's very complicated, and the state does provide us with their audit report and detailed schedules that help us in getting the proportionate share recorded correctly on the city's books. This next slide gives you an accounting equation. So when you look at things and try to get your head around what some of this means, you'll see that assets plus deferred outflows minus liabilities and deferred inflows equals the terminology net position. Most of the time when you're working at a commercial business, you only hear things like assets minus liabilities is my equity, and for a government, you're going to see it a little different. So we thought this would be helpful. The governmental activities net position is just over $7.6 million, and for business type activities, the net position is $14.8 million. And again, this slide just shows you in a pie chart the percentage. So of our net position, 66% is for business type activities, and the remaining 34% is for our governmental activities. And that was a less than 1% increase from 2017. So when we look at our net position, we're required to break it down into a few categories. We have capital assets net of related debt of $4.2 million, unrestricted net position of $3.4 million to get to the total net position for governmental activities at $7.6. For our business type activities, you're going to see a new category, or I shouldn't say a new category, but a category with a larger dollar amount. We have our capital assets net of related debt of $8.5 million, and then in the current period, our restricted net position is now over $3 million. And that was an action taken by you several months ago with regard to monies that were, again, the terminology that we used in the audit report was monies to be used for future capital improvements. The unrestricted is the remaining balance of $3.3 million to get to the total $14.8. So everything I just spoke about was looking at the statement of net position on page 9 of the audit report. Now we're going to look at the statement of activities, and that is the second required financial statement from a government-wide perspective. So in the first column, we talk about our total expenses, and the total expenses for governmental activities was about $4 million. We had some program revenues, charges for services of about $209,000, operating grants and contributions of about $323,000, and capital grants and contributions roughly of $40,000. Our general revenues, which comprises our real estate, income tax, are at $3.4 million, and you see that's the significant revenue stream from a governmental perspective. The change in net position for governmental activities was an increase of $29,000 for the current period. Looking at our business type activities, our total expenses were roughly $3 million. Our charges for services were approximately $2.9 million. Our general revenues were about $211,000, and that resulted in a change in net position for our business type activities of an increase of $138,000. So now we're going to flip our focus to our fund level statements, and that starts on page 11 of the audit report. And now you're going to see different terminology, you're going to see a different reporting perspective, and we're going to use fund level reporting. So our first slide looks at the general fund, and you'll see that the total assets for the general fund were just over $5.6 million. The liabilities were about $275,000, and the difference between the two of them is something that we call fund balance, not net position, and that was $5.3 million. Under the GASB rules, we're required to report your fund balance into 5 categories. And we've listed the 5 categories here on the slide, even if they weren't applicable, just so that you would be familiar with the terminology. Committed fund balances at the end of fiscal year 2018 was just over $400,000. The assigned fund balance was about $13,000, and the remaining balance is unassigned at $4.9. All of the definitions, non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned, are in the draft audit report, and I would encourage you just to have an understanding as to the categories and what they mean. Just as a quick refresher, the committed fund balance of $400 is related to your park impact. The assigned represents the remaining lease payments on a non-cancelable lease, and the unassigned is obviously the balance. And that's also outlined in the audit report. The next slide looks at the general fund revenues and expenditures. The total revenues were $4 million. The expenditures were about $3.9 million, and there was an excess of revenues over expenditures of $89,000. Now, when we talk about fund level and we talk about government-wide perspective, we're required to do reconciliations to show how we get from point A to point B. So on this slide here, we're showing you all the required adjustments to get to the statement of activities, which is one of the government-wide financial statements. For fiscal year 2018, you see we had some significant reconciling items. Our capital outlay was just over $309,000. And again, it's a reconciling item because on the government-wide financial statements, we're recording it as an asset and we're depreciating it over its estimated useful life. When we look at the fund level financial statements, it's an expenditure and with what you would know it as a capital outlay cost. Depreciation expense is roughly $391,000. Again, that is not reflected in your fund level statements. It only shows up in your government-wide statements, and so it's an adjustment out. Our debt service expenditures represent principal payments on your long-term debt. And again, from a fund level perspective, it's an expenditure, and from a government-wide perspective, it's a reduction of your liability. And then the remaining ones aren't as large in dollar amount, but the change in accrued interest, the change in compensated absences, and then we have the net pension adjustment, which was the result of all of the journal entries required to record the current year pension adjustment to get to the positive $29,000 that we spoke about a few minutes ago. This next slide, actually you can see pretty good. I was worried the type might be pretty small. When we're looking at our fund level statements, we talk about our fund balance, and this slide gives you a quick snapshot of how we go from fund balance to net position. Our fund balance was just over $5.3 million, and our net position was $7.6, and this shows you all of the reconciling items. The significant ones here would be on the government-wide financial statements. You report your capital assets net of accumulated depreciation. That does not appear on your fund level statements of $5.6 million. Our long-term debt does not show up on a fund level financial statement, only on a government-wide, and that's $1.4. Our net pension liability at $2.3, and then the other items were the deferred inflows and outflows of resources. This next slide we thought would be helpful. It shows your general fund revenues by classification, just to give you a quick snapshot how it compared to the prior year. So you can look and see that the majority of them were fairly consistent year over year. The largest increase was in property taxes. There was not a rate adjustment, so it was attributable to growth. The rest of them were fairly comparable. The next slide shows the expenditures for the general fund for each of the categories. And again, nothing there significantly jumps out. Just looking real quick. Parks and Rec is probably the one that has the largest variance, and it probably was mostly related to grant-funded activities, I'm thinking. The next couple slides take a look at the utility fund. And so we're going to look at the operating revenues and expenses of your utility fund. You'll see from this slide, the operating revenues had a decrease of 12.6% over the prior year. We had $3.4 million, and we dropped to $3 million. Our operating expenses stayed right about the same at $2.5 million. The operating income for fiscal year 2017 was about $909,000, and for the current period, we were at $480,000. This slide goes from operating income to change in net position. And the significant item here is just seeing your interest expense associated with the debt for the utility fund of $428,000, which resulted in the change in net position going down to $138,000. The next slide gives you a snapshot of the budget to actual for the general fund, and this is a required supplemental schedule in the back part of the audit report. We're required to show the original budget, the final budget, compared to the actual results and report the variance. So I'm just going to focus on the final budget numbers compared to actual. On the revenue side, the final budget was $3.7 million. Our actual revenues were just over $4 million, resulting in a positive variance of $289,000. Our expenditures on the final budget were expected to be about $4.5 million. We ended with $3.9 million, again, a positive variance of $627,000. We anticipated having to use fund balance. At the end of the year, we did not need it. We actually had a change in fund balance to the positive of $89,000. So when you look at that, there's some pretty big numbers, and we spoke about it when Barry and Jim and I met. And largely, it was a number of capital items that were anticipated to have started or have been purchased in fiscal year 18 that just got postponed to fiscal year 19, which is why there was such a large variance. Earlier, I mentioned that we did the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, and Because of that, we are required to report on your internal controls over financial reporting and on compliance. We're required to communicate in writing anything that is deemed to be a material weakness in internal control, and I've provided the definition of what a material weakness is. We did not identify any material weaknesses in the current period. There were no instances of non-compliance required to be reported under government auditing standards. And I'm going to pause here for a moment. So that was the financial highlights from the audit. I, again, do encourage each of you to read the report. Any comments, suggestions, questions you have, please make sure you circulate them to us. It's really important from our perspective that you feel like you're in a position to review, approve, and accept the audit report. Jim, having sat through it for the very first time, I do expect questions. I want you guys to ask questions. I want you to feel comfortable with your numbers, so don't hesitate. If you have one, someone else probably does too, and so we're glad to answer them. I'd like to thank the staff for all their hard work. You know, while it's the first week of October, we started right after Labor Day. It was Barry's, I'm going to say really her first audit, because last year she kind of got thrown into it, but it went very well. She was very prepared. The staff were very prepared. It just went very well. So I just want to say thank you. The last item and the last slide that I have, and you're saying, yes, good, her last slide, is what we call required communications. And that is the separate letter that I passed out to you when I first got here. These are things under professional standards we're required to communicate to the mayor and council and or those that are charged with governance. And I've just kind of highlighted a few of them. I do encourage you to read the entire letter and make sure if you have any questions, you also let me know. The first item under required communications is that there were no new accounting policies adopted in fiscal year 2018, and none of the existing policies were changed in a significant way. There were no transactions that were entered into by the city which lacked authoritative guidance or consensus. We had no difficulties in dealing with management in performing and completing the audit. We did have some significant journal entries, and we just highlighted here the net effect of those journal entries, some of which were the pension-related entries, and Barry was helpful in gathering the data and compiling the data, but it's a pretty complicated thing, so we kind of did it together, and I will make sure that I review it with her in detail so next year she can do one step further. And I just wanted to point out, just in case you're looking at something that you saw previously and then you're looking at the audit report, the change in net position for governmental activities did decrease by about $100,000 through audit adjustments, and the business type activities saw a decrease in net position of about $60,000, just so you know that. There were no disagreements with management during the audit. So that concludes what I have, and I'd be more than glad to answer any questions.
Questions from anyone?
You know, I ask this every single year. Did you find any misappropriation of funds? Did you find anything that was suspicious? Did you find anything at all like that?
If we did, you would have heard it in our report.
You got to verify.
Yes. So we are required, if we ever found, if we suspected, if we found, that we would have to bring it to your attention. So it's very important for you to know that. And it's always one level up. And so if it would be at a staff level, it would be one up. If it would be at a management level, it would be right to you guys. So that is required by professional standards.
And just shows you how professional our people are too. Thank you, guys.
Anybody else?
On page 6, the deferred outflows of resources, the bottom slide, they're not exactly the same. The outflows are consumptions and the inflows are acquisitions, so.
Well, thank you. I looked at you quick and I had a panic
They sounded
attack.
exactly alike, but they're not the same. Because one is consumption, the other's acquisition, so,
Thank you. Now I feel better.
yeah, that's fine.
Nothing like a slide that's not quite right. Thank you.
All right, thank you for all your work, and thank you staff, Barry and Clara and Jim and the rest for a pretty good audit, looks like, so thank you. And we'll have this on the docket for approval on Monday night. So if you do have questions, I encourage you to read this letter that was passed out in conjunction with the slide presentation, as well as get with the staff between now and then if you have anything at all that's on your mind whatsoever regarding the audit.
Thank you very much.
So I sound like Elvis there a minute. Thank you very much. All right. Next, we have an opportunity for the community to make a statement regarding any items that are not on the agenda. Would anybody care to make a statement about any items that are not on the agenda tonight? Remember, identify yourself and your address in 3 minutes.
Hi, Robin Frazier, Bentley Street in Tawnytown. I just wanted to say that I was disappointed that when I asked for some information that should have been easily obtained, I was directed to do a Public Information Act request. Perhaps we've already gotten it and I'll get it tonight, and I'm certainly willing to wait for it, but it was just a couple closing statements from 3 meetings and names of the individuals designated to be trained for Open Meetings Act and their proof of training. So I did the PIA because I was instructed to, but it really should have probably just been given to me. So maybe we can take care of that tonight. And the other thing I just wanted to say is that maybe some of you have the same goal I do, which is to read the most popular book in the world by far in full before you die someday, and that's the Bible. And I try to read that every day. There's a daily Bible that helps you read through in a year, and I just thought I would read part of the New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament, Proverbs, and Psalms, and then a promise of the day. And I'm just going to read a little part of the New Testament. It says, "Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burden, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For every man shall bear his own burden. Let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith." I thought that was very encouraging today. And today's promise is from Isaiah 59:1. "Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened, that it cannot save, neither his ear heavy, that it cannot hear." God is always capable of helping us. His hand is powerful and can save. His ears are open to our cries. So I just thought that was encouraging to me and thought I would share it with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to make any comments on non-agenda items?
Carl Eatball, excuse me. Isn't there supposed to be some separation between church and state, and the state? Because we just had quite a talk here, and we could get this on Sunday. We don't need it tonight.
Anyone else care to make any comments? Okay, we'll move right along. Let's ask the council if there's any conflict of interest in anything they see on the agenda tonight?
Yes,
No,
sir.
sir.
All right, moving into resolutions, ordinances, and agreements. We have introduction of ordinance 06, 2018, the operating budget amendment. Would you like to explain what we're doing there? Folks, we have that in your packet, but we have to make some adjustments. Jim's going to fill you in on that.
That was out for you this evening. We talked about this a little bit last month. Our real estate revenues have increased beyond what was projected when we did the budget. So we're looking at an increase of $70,000 on the revenue side there. And we talked about the streetlight retrofit program last month also, and the need to fund that because we received the grant that we had applied for. That's the next $46,000 that's in there on the revenue side. And the result of that is that we're going to be able to reduce our use of fund balance by $58,300 for the current fiscal year.
Good news.
On the expense side, we've also seen a decrease in expenses with our solid waste recycling expense so far this year. And that's $37,000. And we are planning to fund the $58,000 for the streetlight retrofit. And again, 46 of that will be reimbursed by a grant. And that leaves us with another increase of $37,500 to upgrade the light poles for the Christmas decorations. So we did get a number on that. That's the $37,500 will be the cost to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but those are the big ticket items, and the net result is we're taking less out of fund balance than we planned to.
Any questions? All right, we'll ask for a motion to approve that on Monday night. No, actually, that'll be introduced Monday night. That won't be up for approval. But up for approval will be the fiscal year audit, which we just heard about. And again, I encourage you to spend some time with the audit and the cover letter and come up with any questions that you may have. We'll also adopt ordinance 05, 2018, open burning. Anybody have any questions on that? That was presented to you tonight at your table. And we'll also have Resolution 2018-11, the water allocation for October. Anyone have any questions with that? All right. Next, it's my pleasure to make some appointments for committee positions that have expired, and I'm thankful that the existing committee members of the Planning and Zoning Commission have agreed to resume their positions. Jim Parker and Jim LaFavor have been on the board for many years, and Jim's been an absolutely marvelous chairperson in guiding this committee, and thank you for your work, Jim, and thank you for your continued commitment to the city. We have a vacancy. Darrell Hale, who was a former council member, has agreed to serve as the alternate in that on that committee. So we're glad to have Darrell back involved with the city. So that's good news. Also, appointments for the Board of Zoning Appeals are basically the same. These are folks that have been on the committee. Lee Hand, Larry Heldebridle, and Steve Farley have all agreed to resume their commitment on the BZNA. And we have an appointment to make for the Parks and Rec Board that's not on the agenda here tonight. Bill Kennedy, who many of you know from his column in the Carroll County Times, has volunteered to serve as that fill that vacancy. and we welcome him. Bill has quite a resume in Parks and Recreation. I was astounded. I didn't know this. I've known Bill Kennedy for many years, but I never knew that he was, his education, his graduate and undergraduate degrees are both in Parks and Recreation. So he's a wonderful asset to have. I'm excited about welcoming him on the committee. So. And although I'll ask you to approve those for me on Monday night. City Manager's report, Jim, what do you have for us tonight?
Okay, couple quick updates. The capital projects and equipments, department heads are working on narrowing that down to the 6-year plan. We do have an update on the Tawny Stair visit. We're planning the visit for the week of November 5th. Any day that week except the 7th will work for Tawny Stair, so if you can please check your calendars for Tuesday night. Hopefully Tuesday we can come up with a date that we'll finally set that up.
Is this a during the day thing, or is this something that'll occur in the evening?
I believe it's going to be daytime.
It's quite a operation. You'll all be impressed.
Did we get a date on that?
Well,
Meeting?
we need to come up with a date.
Okay, not yet a date, okay.
Does anybody have any dates that conflict on their schedule, I guess is what you
Just
probably should
right.
start.
So far, just the week of November 5th, excluding the 7th.
Yeah, anything but that Wednesday. Tuesday's election day, so that's probably not the best day of the world. But Monday, Thursday, or Friday look good. But as part of this, and Jim, we need to get the details as much as we can, but they're celebrating 60 years. 1958 is when Eric Glass started that operation at Tawny Stairs, and been providing jobs and welfare to our community all these years, and tax dollars too. So that's a wonderful thing to commemorate, 60 years in business, and we want to. I want to prepare a plaque that will list some of the accomplishments that Tawny Stairs made over the years. So if we can maybe ask the Glass family to give us some background information where we can compose something that's fitting, it would be great.
Ready? Moving on down the report, the Sewells are still working on the numbers from their side with regard to potential annexation. The Syrian property is switching from a mouth easement to a rural legacy easement. The numbers are still considered confidential until it goes before the county commissioners. So that's still kind of chugging along, but nothing that we can really act on just yet.
Say that again, it's from
Maryland Ag Land Preservation Fund to Rural Legacy Funding. Right.
So
there's a
I'm
different.
sure there's different restrictions involved.
Yeah, and there's a different scoring system with the Rural Legacy. The per acre cost is more formula driven as opposed to an appraisal, which would be the Maryland, the mouth easement that's driven by appraisals. But the numbers are still considered confidential. So we had talked about using the lower appraised value. So we have some talks to hold with the Syrian still.
All right.
Let's see, a couple additional items. Now we talked about that we got the estimate for the upgrades to the light poles for the Christmas decorations. That $37,500 is, of course, above both our $10,000 spending limit in the charter and the $25,000 in the code. So it doesn't really fall under a sole source type situation or an emergency to not go out to bid. So while we can amend the budget to reflect that expense for it to be done this year, we've got to figure out a way to do that, either break the project into pieces so that we're not, if we have to go out to bid, it's not going to be done by December.
Well, and that's it. My thought was, if it's possible to, because Fern Rocky's already doing the retrofitting for the other lights, if we just added it to that contract, or added it to that, because again, they're retrofitting our lights. It's still the same idea, it's just a little different, because they've been.
All electric, right?
Right, it is all electric. They've been the low bidder on, I think Kevin said, the last 3 projects that we've had to do. And the fact that they're, you know, a local business.
Hey, can you give us any guidance on that? I'm not sure what
Well, a couple
to
things.
do about that.
Let's start with the budget amendment, the one we talked about in this specific line item. To amend the budget, it's going to require a supermajority vote, so 4 out of the 5 of you. 4 out of the 5 of you can also pass things the same night it's introduced. So on Monday, you can do, if you have 4 out of the 5 of you to do this, you can also declare it emergency, and therefore you can pass it this coming Monday or Tuesday at your meeting. Because if you don't, and you don't pass it till November, you're going to miss the window on the funding. That's number one. Number two, to the councilwoman's point, you can amend a current contract. So it'd be amending the scope of a current contract that you have, so you're not bidding it, since it's similar services for the similar type of product. They're putting lights in, and now I guess it's as simple as they're putting plugs in. Maybe it's more than that, but so you have an existing contract with Rodkey, and then on Monday you can vote to amend that contract, and they'll honor the prices, I would assume, because they're probably doing this on a per light, per piece, hourly basis, and therefore a special bid wouldn't be required since they're already working on the same thing. So it would be like almost 3 votes, 2 for the budget and 1 for the service, but it can be done.
Did they already provide a quote for this? Have we talked to Rodkey about it, or?
Yeah, Kevin got 37.5.
That's.
Yeah.
Okay, that is from the, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's well below the line items that he was, budget changes anyway.
And as a,
Well,
I
that
would say
sounds
just
like a
after
plan.
last year, after the whole Christmas fiasco, I'd hate to have to do that again.
and on that note too, I would have, wager to say that it's not just Christmas decorations that these things are going to benefit, correct?
No, and that's it. And Kevin said, their guys can use them throughout, the public works can use these outlets throughout the year, just for, for their work. Also, it doesn't just have to be Christmas decorations. We could use them for, if we had vendors along the street, during any kind of function, for Main Street, outdoor displays of any sort.
Sounds good. All right.
Just a couple more quick things. With regard to the Roberts Mill Run Stormwater Retrofit Project, there's going to be a community meeting next week, Tuesday evening at 5:30, there at the dead end of O'Brien Avenue. We have one of these towards the beginning of the project where the adjacent property owners have a chance to come out, see the plans, ask questions of the resource management staff and myself. So that project is under final engineering right now.
And what day is that, may I ask again?
Tuesday.
Over the 9th.
So it'll make for a little bit of a busy evening for me to be over there and then back here since we're pushing our meeting back a day. But that's good news. It's moving along, and we'll keep the residents out there up to date with everything. And also with regard to stormwater, as you're aware, we purchased the tax lien at auction on the Trevanian Terrace Lot 45 property, and we hosted a kickoff meeting for that project a couple weeks ago. The county has selected Brutus and Associates to be the engineer on the project, and this project is going to treat another 52 acres of impervious area. So between the 2 projects, when they're done, we will be far above having retrofit the required acreage. We'll have, we're only required to retrofit 78 acres, and Roberts Mill Run treats 87, and Trevanian Terrace is projected, it's not final design yet, but projected to treat 52. And we've also gotten some credit for tree plantings we did several years ago. So we should be in very good shape as far as our MPDES permit. Now, keep in mind that we're on a joint permit with the county and the other municipalities, so as long as the whole county meets the 20%, we're compliant with the permit. But part of our agreement with the county and the other municipalities was that each municipality would have half of their 20% reduction done within the first permit term. So we should be well beyond that by the time our first 5 years is up. So some good news there. And that's about it for me, unless you have other questions.
Questions for Jim? Just a quick update on Henry. I visited with him Sunday, and they seemed to be in pretty good spirits at the time. Still got a long way to go, I'm afraid, but he was much more comfortable than the last couple of times I saw him Sunday, so hopefully he'll continue to make progress. But I honestly don't expect him back anytime soon, but may surprise us, who knows?
We'll keep him in our prayers.
Keep him in your prayers. Absolutely. Okay. Any questions on the departmental reports?
I was looking at the next page, which is the IT department report, and we've added a new staffer there, and there's data in our packets about that. I had requested that my emails be restored since Christmas. I have a habit of logging in to the Tonytown email and then going through, because there's a spam filter. And as of this date, it has not happened, and so I'd just like to bring it up publicly that I've requested that, and I was assured that could be done for me. We got confirmation that those exist in the server.
I'll follow up with Dan.
Would you do that for me? Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments on the department reports? The gazebo RFP came back, and if you noticed in Bob's report that we only got one bid back, and he doesn't think that it meets the bid specs, so we might have to go out for rebid on that. And I encourage you, Jim, to encourage Bob to get this done so we don't drag this out until Christmas next year, or even Halloween next year. All right. Legal report, Jay.
Mr. Mayor, there's a couple items. The first, to update you on the Meads Crossing Railroad crossing. I give you the update every month on that, and we're making some progress. And as I told you, you have to envision this, even though it's Meads Crossing, we keep talking about that, it's going to be a city crossing. It's going to be a public crossing when we're done. And the railroad while it's owned by Maryland Midland, that is now a national company owned by Genesee and Wyoming. So we're dealing with companies out of Jacksonville and out of Connecticut. The long and short of it, I've given you the fact that they offered us the ability to sign an agreement with them, and we had to pay $45,000 to do that, and then yearly license fees. We've worked through the land records to find out that, in fact, Mr. Flickinger, who will eventually deed the property to the city, is the fee simple owner of the property, and there is no records of the railroad having a right-of-way agreement. Now, it's clear that railroad's been there, and they have the right to use it, but they might not have the right to make us sign agreements and do the things that they want. For example, they want us to put out an insurance policy that we would insure that crossing for perpetuity, every year paying a premium to make sure there's no accidents. They want the city to indemnify them in the event that there's an accident there with the train and the cars. And if they own the right-of-way, right, if they owned a possessory interest, that might be something you would consider. But since they do not own that and the city owns the underlying right-of-way, our position when we're negotiating with them is that they should be doing this for us. And the negotiations have moved to a point where we have somebody on their end who's at least working with us to discuss this. They are not pleased with the city's position. And, the bottom line, in short, is if they wanted us to sign this agreement that would give a bunch of rights to us, and for us to do that, pay $45,000, wouldn't the converse be true? Since they don't have the rights and they would want us to give them the rights under that agreement, shouldn't they pay us $45,000? Now, that's not what we're after, but this is becoming a difficult issue because it's timing, and Meads Crossing's buildings are being held up until this can be worked out. They have moved from help with the senator that Councilman Vigliotti gave us to the governor's office. The governor's office has been in touch with the railroad saying they need this to happen. And Meads Crossing has at least gotten the services on a consulting basis of a railroad attorney that does national work on this. So to be continued, it has not worked out yet. However, on Monday night, what we're going to need you to vote on, and we'll put it under a new business, is this agreement may come in anytime, and if it's acceptable to the parties, we're going to need the mayor to sign it so that we can move ahead and get the crossing put in. So we're going to need you to authorize the mayor, if you're comfortable to do that, to sign the crossing access agreement. Any questions on the railroad?
Yeah, when you use the pronoun they, you're talking every time about the railroad. Is that correct?
Yes, the they, well, it's not just them. They're owned a subsidiary of Genesee and Wyoming.
Okay.
So they is the railroad consultants, yes. Okay.
Why are they not happy with the town's position? Because
we're not paying them the money they wanted and not indemnifying them and not putting the insurance policy in place, and we shouldn't have to do those things, yes.
Because in actuality, they don't have authority over the property to force you to do those things, correct?
That's our position. And without belaboring the point, you go 100 yards to the south, there's another railroad crossing that goes into Meadowbrook. Those things don't exist. That crossing was built when Maryland Midland was an independent short line and not a national piece, but it doesn't exist. You go to the north a couple hundred yards and you have a crossing across Angel Road, and those things don't exist. So the issue is, why would we want to have that happen, especially since we are the successors in title to Superior Title, if that makes sense. So to be continued on that. The second issue is a follow-up with Councilman Vigliotti's scanning issue, and I sent you some emails on this, so we'll put terminology so we can talk about this. What Councilman Vigliotti had talked about in the last session was when someone comes into a store, their video cameras obviously record your presence, but they have recognition software, and what it is facial recognition software. It's what you hear that the police use, the security forces use. Well, private industry does that as well. So they recognize who you are when you come into the store, and it's not just recognizing who you are, but they can then track you through the store. They can match your purchases to what you purchase, and they get a lot of demographic information and other things. I sent you an article, unbelievably, by the ACLU, which I never thought Councilman Vigliotti would be on the same side of, but the ACLU is very big into that, and that article was one I think you could read. It's a couple pages long. Stores like Lowe's and things like that we're talking about. Most stores do not acknowledge that they do it. Some of them were there very upfront and they say they do, so you don't really know whether they're doing this or not. So that becomes an issue about privacy. And so then we had said, as you recall, we would talk to MML and the National League of Cities to see what's being done. So I sent you a bunch of legislation that's being done throughout the country, and these things are being done by state legislatures. They're not necessarily being done by local governments, but state legislatures to deal with this issue in a variety of different ways. So I asked MML if there's anything being done on the Maryland State Legislature, and they provided a House bill that dealt with facial recognition with police forces. So it's, in the right stadium, but not really what we're talking about, meaning there is no state legislation. And that's important because if the state were to pass some type of privacy legislation, we would be preempted, meaning that we couldn't pass something else because the state would be dealing with that. So as of now, we're not preempted. So yes, the long and short of it is we do have the ability to do something, theoretically. What we could do practically is a separate issue to discuss, meaning how would we enforce it since we don't even know what companies would use that and things like that. You're probably not talking about, at this time, your mom and pop shops, but you could be talking about your big chains that might be here in town, McDonald's, Food Lion, things like that. So that's as far as I've gotten. So, I mean, now I've told you what it is. You will need to tell me whether you want me to do something else, something more, something whatever. So
I would personally like to pursue this because if we have the opportunity to protect the privacy of our citizens at this point in time, I'd like to do that. If anybody's interested, I've found a number of reports from international correspondents who have gone to, I think it was the Xinjiang province in China, which is a region of China that has been dominated by the Chinese government. It's kind of like a separatist region. And the way that they use facial recognition software, they actually show you examples of how this works. There's like 158 points on the face that it uses to be able to identify somebody from way across the street. If you're crossing the street illegally, there's a system that automatically recognizes you, puts your name up on a board and says, hey, stop crossing the street. And if you don't comply, then you have this kind of what they call a social, I think it's called a social credit rating, where they track every single thing you do, including the purchases you make at stores, your shopping, your commercial activity. And based on those things, the government will deny you things like being able to fly on an airplane, right? Now, certainly we're not talking about that here in town or at this level or anywhere in this country right now, but the danger is there. That, I mean, we saw just a few months ago how data from Facebook could be co-opted from private firms. It's really not that large of a step for the government to come in and say at some point, okay, well, we want all the information from Home Depot or from Lowe's based on the kinds of materials that people are purchasing because we have a concern about, some kind of structure being built. And, if we can proactively approach this, I'd like to, I want to explore this. I want to do anything we can to protect our citizens. Right? I mean, obviously, we won't tell businesses you can't use this because if, say, Councilman Frazier decides to go to Sheetz, and I'm not saying that Sheetz does this because I don't know. If Councilman Frazier goes to Sheetz and he decides he wants to be tracked, and he wants, his purchases to be tallied up for like a coupon or something, then he can voluntarily consent to do so. And that's the critical part here, is that, is this something that's going to be consensual? And I want to make sure that if our citizens are going to be tracked, they're doing it with informed consent.
Does that then, I guess I wouldn't understand how a business could do that aside from simply putting something on the building. So are we demanding that they just tell people that they're doing this? Is that essentially where we're...
In part, but then there are also technologies out there where if you enter a store, right, and I know some others up here have talked about this before, where if you enter a store, like your phone automatically picks up where you are and provides you a coupon for that store.
Right.
So there are apps and other pieces of technology out there where you approach a business or something and you can voluntarily choose to accept. Like you get an alert on your phone that says this business is being monitored by biometric data collection or something, and if you choose to participate, click yes. If you choose to opt out, no. And then based on the answer that you provide in your phone, the business will not track you.
Well, I'm not sure I believe them, though. I mean, just,
Well,
you're supposed to be able to turn off your tracking on your
The
phone,
problem
and they
is-
say they still can do it anyway.
In thought, yeah, that'd be great, but they can't do that because the system's going to track every person's face that comes in, and they're not going to be able to say, well, don't track that person's face. It's going to have to be something where it becomes an implied consent, where they put a sign at the door saying, we do this, if you don't like it, don't come in. It's unfortunately the only way it's going to happen. And I mean, I'm not opposed to that being, but again, we get down to, can it be enforced? And that's really the problem, because a lot of these companies look at it as a trade secret that they do it, and they're not going to tell you that they're doing it. And they probably have all sorts of legal people there that can deny what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that's really the problem. I'm not opposed, definitely I support the idea of forcing them to tell people that they're doing it. I think that's important, but just remember, there's really very little enforcement I think we could do with that.
It's interesting you brought that up, because I mean, some of the literature that Jay sent us, it talked about including in a law, if the city government might not be able to take action, there's a private right to action, I believe is what the phrase was, where a citizen has the ability to go forward with something. And if we give them that legal right, they also have that recourse to action.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, if everybody's okay with it, I would love to be able to explore this further and actually get into it.
You thinking about prohibiting that inside the city limits or something like that?
Well, not necessarily.
That technology?
Not necessarily a prohibition, because there are some people who like that stuff. They want to be involved in it. But for somebody like me who really doesn't want to be tracked that, hey, I purchased, loaded fries at Sheetz, I mean, I don't want to be tracked. And they're really good.
Say, I follow you around anyway, you make notes. I think if we explore something where we require that they disclose that they do it, is an appropriate course at this time.
So I can work out some ideas for you. These are big frontier issues, and you're balancing people's an expectation of privacy, which you typically don't have in a public forum, and you're also dealing with, the corporations who are considered entities who also have the right of free enterprise to conduct their businesses the way they want with some regulation. So I can give you some ideas, and we can see whether it goes far enough or not far enough. You notice that, and you go into most places, there's like the picture of the video camera, and it says you are under video and audio surveillance and things like that. That is clear traveled ground, and we could add something like that. That says, and I would imagine most places are going to take the easy way out and say something like, and you may be being tracked, just add that to it, saying we might or we might not, we're not going to tell you. But if you don't want it, as the councilman said, you're probably not going to shop there. I mean, that's the thing. So if you direct me, I can work something out. So we can talk about that on Monday.
Well, my opinion is that it's an issue that's beyond our scope, but some mild statement to the fact that we want to protect our citizens' privacy would be okay with me. I mean, I don't have any problem with that, but I just don't think we're going to be able to do anything that has any teeth in it at this level.
And the other thing to consider, because your next thought...
Maybe everybody would come to Tonytown to shop if we did.
But the next thing you consider, you just say, okay, well, let's go to our local delegation and see if we can do this in Annapolis. And you have to be realistic about that, is if they take it to Annapolis, you're going to have national corporate people fighting it in Annapolis. And if they fight it in Annapolis and say, hey, it didn't pass, then the question becomes, well, you're not preempted because they did it, but did you not have the authority to do it in the first place? Because why are you asking Annapolis to do it? So be careful how big you make it. So. Okay, my last issue, if there's no more on that.
Thank you, Jay.
You're welcome. Update on the Board of Zoning Appeals. We usually don't have a lot of traffic there, but we are this month. The brewery fire people that came in last month that you said to work out an agreement with for the benefit assessment fees, their next phase is to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for their conditional use to do their operations. So their hearing is set for October 17th at 7:30, and they'll be before the board for that. And as you recall, the Board of Zoning Appeals denied the application for the packaged goods store at the old Sheetz. And after the opinion came out, the applicants for the packaged goods store, so not the owner of the property, the applicants, filed a motion for reconsideration with the Board of Zoning Appeals. And, that's unusual for us because we don't usually have that, but a motion for reconsideration basically says, based on their opinion, the opinion that was issued by the board, it was in more or less words that there wasn't testimony provided by the operator of the business to provide them the foundation to give the grant, because there wasn't anybody there credible to say the hours and things like that. So they're asking that the issue be reconsidered, and if it would be reconsidered, then they would have a subsequent hearing where that kind of information could be offered. So after the brewery fire proposal at 7:30 on the 17th, probably around 8 o'clock or so, there'll be a discussion from the Board of Zoning Appeals about reconsidering this. And just so that everybody is clear, including the public, is that the discussion that night is simply on should it be reconsidered. If they decide that it should not, then the issue is dead, and then the applicants can file an appeal with Circuit Court. If they decide it should be reconsidered, then that's all they do that night, and then there'll be a notice and a hearing and advertising and the whole 9 yards again to set up another hearing date, in which case the case will be heard again with kind of new ground at that point in time. That night at the 17th, there certainly will allow public input as to whether it should be reconsidered or not, but the arguments from the applicant are simply on, should it be reconsidered? So I hope that's clear enough on that. And that's what's going on with them. Any other questions on that?
Not a question, but I do want to mention with brewery fire, as is a process in the city that came before the Planning Commission at our last meeting to give recommendation, and the Planning Commission did give a favorable recommendation to BZA for that. So just aware where it is in that process.
That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay. Questions for Jay? All right, moving right along. New business, we have the monthly financial report. Does anybody have any questions on the monthly?
Mr. Mayor, we didn't do old business.
Sorry?
Old business?
Old business, anyone have any old business?
There is something I would like to bring up, and I am somewhat reluctant to do so because it's going to, invariably, I think, bring up discussion about last month and the issue surrounding the censure. But I wanted to make it known that 2 weeks ago, roughly, Councilman Frazier sent letters to everybody on the mayor and council speaking further about the issue, and on the envelope, he included my personal address on the back. And so I wanted to say, first of all, that I had nothing to do with this letter that Councilman Frazier sent out, and second of all, that I find this unacceptable, and I would like to know from Councilman Frazier why you felt it was necessary to include my home address on your personal correspondence.
Those are stickers that I made up when you were involved with the Tri-District Republican Club, and that's the last of them.
But why did you include them on your personal correspondence on a letter for you that I had nothing to do with?
I was sending, at the time you were involved in founding this, the Tonytown version of the club, that I had made a whole sheet of those stickers, and that was a letter sent to you. I didn't have to write out the address like I did for my other fellow councilmen, showing that I had actually paid the hotel amount.
Well, I'm not talking...
Sent a letter.
I'm not talking about...
I actually tried to tell my fellow councilman that I'm sorry this
let's stay on
conflict
track,
did come up.
I'm not talking about the contents of the letter. I'm
Why
talking
don't you
about...
talk about it? Because I've tried my best to make peace with you over this issue, but...
Because you're using my name and my personal address on the back of correspondence that you sent to everybody on this council.
And what's interesting is I didn't receive that letter because mine was delivered to Councilman Bigliotti's house because they scanned the opposite side of it and sent it to him. Because for some odd reason, his address was on the back of all of the envelopes. I think there was some deception meant there, and I'm not sure what would go through someone's mind to do such a thing, but...
Certainly not appropriate behavior.
I would ask that you please do not do that again.
I don't have any more stickers. There was only one sheet of stickers left, and I'm all finished with
So
it.
you would do it again, but you don't have any more stickers. Okay, great, brilliant.
That's all for me. Thank you.
All right. Now let's move into new business. Anyone have any questions on the monthly financial report?
No, sir.
How about on the accounts payable?
I have a couple questions. On page 2 of the report, it says that the 6 were supposed to go to the town event. I attended the regional MML event, but there was chaos about whether I had to pay for it, and I had to actually pay my own way for that, which I thought was injurious to me. and didn't appreciate that. But I noticed that $180 is spent on page 2 for going to these regional things. And then I did cash the check for $231 where you all ripped me out of the fall convention. So they sent that money back to me, so I cannot go to that. And then on page 7, why did we reimburse the facade on George's York Street for $1,743.80? Is that part of a program we have for economic development that results in reimbursements to come for that? Okay, so if you do a good job at fixing up the front of your store, you can apply for reimbursement in the town.
facade grant.
Facade grants, and this is a facade grant. That's a great thing to make more publicly known, that we offer that through, I believe, Nancy McCormick's department.
Been
And you
using
can
this for
apply
years.
for and be approved to help lift the image of Tawnytown businesses with financial help
There's
from the
many,
city.
many people on our main streets who have taken advantage of this. Many, many people.
What keep in mind is a reimbursement. It
Right,
is,
it's state money.
okay,
It's up to 50% of the
correct.
qualified investment. So we've seen it utilized pretty heavily for signage, because not a lot of actual building improvements are done in a way that qualifies for the facade program. But more often than not, signage, as long as it's fitting with the district, qualifies. So we've seen it used very heavily for that.
The awnings that you see is another thing that's been funded by these grants.
Then I have one final thing on this accounts payable. It says on page 8 that $179.41 was reimbursed to the mayor for travel on July the 8th. Where did you go on July the 8th? It cost $179.41. Is that hotel cost or is that
I
gas?
think that's July and August.
July and August expenses.
What's it, 7/8? I thought that was the 8th of July.
No, it's 7
2
through
months.
8 of 2018. It's
2
months
months.
worth.
Part of it involved my travel back and forth to Annapolis to a couple of legislative committee meetings. No overnight stays of any kind.
Okay, I was curious about that number. I don't see any other reimbursement requests of that type in here except for the regular payments that are paid to the Planning Commission. So I wanted to ask about that, and thank you for your help with that.
All right. Amendment to RKK inspection contract. You want to explain
on
that
this real
to us?
quick. It's a simple amendment. We have RKK are the inspectors for the city on the Meads Crossing project. You already approved their contract. They have third-party inspections for things they can't do, paving inspections, whatever like that. They've exceeded the allotment that they had been anticipated, and they need to increase that allotment for that. It's a pass-through cost, meaning they bill RK&K bills us, and we bill the developer. So it needs to be done.
Okay.
So it's not that we ourselves are going to be owing any money, this is simply money that's going to be passed through back to us.
The rest of it, I believe.
All right. Next, we have public comment pertaining to agenda items. I ask anyone who would like to make a comment on any items that we've talked about that appeared on the agenda to come forward. Well then, we will entertain a motion to adjourn. After we adjourn this meeting, I will going to read a statement to instruct council to make a motion to go into closed session so they choose. So does anyone care to make a motion to adjourn? And a second.
What, point of order? What? Do we make the motion to adjourn and go into closed session, or do we make the motion to adjourn and then we vote to go into closed session?
The way the mayor's doing it, you can adjourn the meeting and then a motion to go into closed session.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question before you adjourn. May I do that? Before there's no motion on the floor? Who is designated to be the person trained for the Open Meetings Act?
Well, first off,
Tonight's meeting.
there is a motion on the floor.
Who made the
And it's
motion
been
to
seconded.
adjourn?
I did,
Oh, I didn't hear you do that.
and it's been seconded.
I didn't hear
Favor
that.
say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, like sign.
Opposed to that, I had a question.
Okay.
if you can make your motion, your next one right now.
Okay.
Let me read this statement, then I'll ask for a motion. I need a motion to adjourn the closed session pursuant to Section 3-305B, Article 3 of the general provisions of the article of the Maryland Annotated Code to consider acquisition of real property for the public purpose that matters directly related to that acquisition, and pursuant to Section 3-305B, Section 14, to discuss before the contract is awarded or bids are opened, a matter directly related to a negotiating strategy or the contents of the bid proposal. If public discussion or disclosure would adversely impact the ability of the public body to participate in the competitive bidding or the proposal process, and pursuant to Section 3-305B, Section 1 of the general provisions of the article, the Maryland Annotated Code, to discuss the appointment and employment and assignment and promotion and discipline or demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of an appointee, employee, or official, or any other personnel matters that affects one or more specific individuals. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. Either way.
Discussion. Before you vote, may I ask a question? These executive sessions, there's been one now 3 months in a row, and a lot of the business, I think, should be conducted before the people and not in secret. But here we go again. It says the written statement has to disclose the reason for closing the meeting and a citation to author of the sessions. I'm reading from the law 3-306. Objects to a closing session, public bodies shall send a copy of the written statement to the board. I don't have a copy. I guess this is a
You
copy.
do. That's exactly what he
Copy
read
this,
right
But
there.
it doesn't say what you're going to do. One of the reasons I left the earlier meeting with one of these illegal secret meetings is because you wouldn't tell whether it was a personal matter or whether it was the issue.
The purpose of the closed session, because
have
the
to
content
tell-
of the closed session.
The law's
It's
old.
confidential.
It goes back decades and decades, and it basically, the intent of the open meetings law is that the people would be restricted from what they do when they go into open meetings by declaring the topic.
But our legislatures
Of
in
what
their
you're
wisdom have
doing.
provided
And when you-
for ways to close a meeting that would benefit the overall populace, and that's what we're doing.
No, I'm just saying that if you read this law, it's really clear. You've got to say what are the specific things you're going to do. Because a lot of things the government does belong in public. You
I
can't
just
raise taxes in
read
executive
what we're
session.
gonna
You
do,
can't
Don.
appoint
Just read
people there. You can only do limited things. So when you have a real general statement like the one here, that doesn't say what's going to happen in a few
Pretty
minutes in
specific.
secret session, you can't tell what's going to happen. Even
Real
last
estate,
month,
we're gonna talk about
Mr.
personnel.
Mayor,
That's what it
even
is,
last
right.
month, I was very concerned when Councilman Wance
All right,
said
any other
that
comments?
the council
That's
was
enough.
not
Yes, two-
restricted to
I
the
got your-
things in the statement.
Anybody else?
Two very brief comments. First of all, these are not secret meetings. We're going into executive session in view of the public, number one. Number two, anything we discuss ends up in minutes that are made public at the following meeting.
They're not called
following public
minutes.
session. Now, in addition to that, you're talking about we're not being specific. The mayor just read a statement with pretty detailed listing of what we're going to be discussing.
This is all the things that could possibly be discussed. It doesn't really
We're
restrict
talking
what
about the
we're
things
talking about.
we're going to discuss.
Real estate and personnel.
Well, I'm just reading from the law,
Because there's no time.
Enough discussion. I'm calling for the question. All in favor,
including a
say aye.
citation.
Opposed, like
Opposed.
sign.
I'm
So
opposed
clear.
to all these secret meetings. It's
They're not
wrong.
secret meetings.
The closed session will resume in a few minutes, as soon as we allow the cable TV people to
It's nap time.
extract their apparatus from this room.
You do your constituents